mean, there are two things about emojis. They allow you to express beyond a word. And in fact, the translation of emoji gives you more expression. The visual culture of which we are, and it's just an extension of that. I would prefer to have more emojis. The challenge, I think, with emojis is interpreting. But anything that allows people to express themselves in a language or a visual culture that's different, I think is very, very important. Let me explain. The success of Snapchat today isn't the fact that it has disposable images. It's the fact that you can filter the heck out of an image and express yourself in ways that have become sort of a reflection of what you want. And I think that has been spawned by emojis. By the way, emojis aren't new. So back in the 90s, I guess, was developed dingback and wingdings. They are two fonts that created the original emoji. And then on top of that, the desktop culture of which we lived in was really emoji-based. Because if you think about it, the home icon is a house. That's an emoji, it's not the word. We find wonderful association and empathy, I think, with the visual language. Because when I think about emoji originally, I think about sort of ancient art in caves. The way that people expressed what was going on in their lives was to draw it on a cave wall. You know, or in Australia, where I grew up, there were handprints and had sort of pigment around the outside of the hand, which gave the shape of a human that was there. I guess that's really the language of code of the day that allowed people to express creatively what they're trying to communicate. Because really that's the game, isn't it? Technology is here for us to communicate clearer the expression of our ideas. It's probably got a little bit crazy with the filtering culture that we're part of today. Personal expression is the new form of entertainment anyway. So the time people take to add filters, edit things, edit your life, and then on top of that, display it with this emoji-based culture, I find it to be fascinating the time that people articulate to express. Where previously you just have to do that with words. And words are definitive. You know, there's an absolute definition of that word. If you think about it, the thing that's overlaid on top of that is culture. You can allow yourself to be fully creative if you have access to code. And what that means is that, you know, you could have simplified physical design because code allows you to create things that you didn't expect before. So instead of designing an ice cream that looks like that, it could look like a star because you've used 3D printing to make it feel like it could be a different design. It doesn't increase the production cost, but allows you to be more creative. So you'd be creative because of the code. Or if you look at a bank in Amsterdam last year called ING, they created this thing called the Next Rembrandt. So this bank collected a lot of Rembrandt paintings, and they scoured all of the code that they'd created with all their collection to determine what could have been the painting that Rembrandt painted next. So with code, they were able to estimate that this is a painting, and they went ahead and created a painting that they said Rembrandt could have painted this next, maybe, based on the historical code that we have. So I think there are times where code influences creativity and creativity influences code. Now, creativity influencing code is the ability for emojis, getting back to your original topic, to look beautiful and to look really rounded and fabulous and colourful and three-dimensional. Now imagine what that culture is going to look like when you put on VR goggles and how you can actually go all the way around the emojis. I don't think they're using it well. I think what they're doing is they have access to use it well, but depending on what brand and what category, it's a bit general for me to say that they are. There is examples, so the ING Bank one that I talked about with their Next Rembrandt, that's a data piece. To scour all that data to determine what could have been next, that's data and creativity living together. That's amazing. The other example of that I think is interesting was a couple of years ago, British Airlines did a billboard in the Piccadilly Circus, and they had this British Airways flight going over the billboard, and this child walks to the edge of the billboard and points to where the plane is going, and it says where it's going. So they use data in a live situation to communicate where the plane people are seeing over their head is headed. I thought that was a genius use of data because it used data in a real-time aspect where people just weren't expecting that in something like billboard communication. So I see data and creativity being used in really interesting ways, but the challenge today is I believe that a lot of brands fail at collecting data creatively. So when I open up an app, for example, the first thing a brand might ask me is that will I allow them to send notifications. What? Then the next thing is, can I know where your location is? What? Or the next thing might be, can I have access to your photos? What? No bloody way. Truthfully, I think there's really interesting ways that people should experience or discover how to collect data, because then you can turn it into something different. You know, when I open up an app, like a retail app, why should I have to enter my name and address and all this detail? Why shouldn't I just be presented with persona? Why not show me Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman and say, are you any of these superheroes? Do you like any of these characters? And if I like him or her, then we think you're going to like this. So you can already understand that you could use data to actually guess what people want before they come into the front door anyway. You don't need to collect that data, because I think it's quite boring to collect data the way we collect it today. The other thing that data allows people to do, which is amazing, is that you can run a scenario. So data is a great way to forecast. You can use data to say, oh, if we run this, we suspect it should work. House of Cards is a classic example of that. So the success of House of Cards, the Kevin Spacey version, is that they ran some data, Netflix ran data and said, we believe that based on all this data that a political miniseries based on Kevin Spacey will be very successful. And yes, it is. And that's why he was able to sign on a 13-episode series without a pilot. That is unheard of in the TV or movie world. Unheard of. But amazing to see that that's possible. And people say to me, isn't innovation and invention the same thing? No, it's far from the same. Innovation is about iterative change based on a disruptive idea. So it's, it's change. Invention is create. Now, and I equate it to the light bulb. The light bulb was invented. LED light bulb, that's innovation. It's not that interesting. But the light bulb itself, amazing. And by the way, invention doesn't always mean it's going to be always a win. But boy, it's amazing if we can do something. So I would argue if we're changing our behaviors and things are sort of really poised to change, what could be invented that allows people to sort of adhere to our brand that's more interesting? And for some brands, it might be as simple as what can we do to our product to make it feel like we've invented a new product based on it? I think a couple of brands that have done really, really well in terms of inventing would be apparel brands like Nike and Adidas. Now, they both are very heavy competitors, but they're constantly trying to invent different ways to make sure that, a pair of shoes that you have on your feet can give you not just the things you want to achieve in your life, but one pair of shoes can do all of those things, like play basketball, kick a soccer ball around, make sure that I can jump up and down like I do in a gym experience, or carry a lot of heavy weight when I'm on a bicycle and feel like I'm actually walking on air at the same time. You have to invent something to do that. And I think in those instances, they've invented new technologies to be able to create a shoe out of one piece, and then to create a three-dimensional sole that is 3D printed. So they're always trying to create something that's absolutely new in their category. I think that's remarkable. Those categories, both those companies you talked about, Airbnb and Uber, both those companies disrupted a current business model using technology. And that's happening everywhere. Coconut water disrupted the Coca-Cola business or the Pepsi sugar business. So that happened that's another part of disruption. There's less technology in that example, but more of a need that humans want. But in the Airbnb and the Uber example, that's technology allowing a business model to be disrupted. I love that. Because the truth is, they were the first because they understood that that category needed to be disrupted. Yeah, I think I quoted that trend in maybe 2012. And what's interesting about that is it's not quite right. Defriend and unfollow is not a mass trend. People do it though. And I used to do that years and years and years ago, and I thought, if I'm like this, surely there are others doing it. And many times is true. But you know what's happening? I think it's the opposite of that. The smart platforms today are already coming in private. So you have to have permission to get inside my network. It's the other way around. It's no longer me having to filter my network. Now I have control the permission who comes in. So it's a slight nuance in what I quoted back many years ago. And part of that, I mean, obviously the political climate right now, globally, is allowing people to assess their own relationship with these platforms, because we're living in a, whether you call it an information bubble or an echo chamber, that's absolutely bloody true. But the reason why those things were really good to start off with is that you're just meant to curate what you want to hear and get on with discovering new stuff that's really unusual and different for you. But we got lazy because the platforms just throw more stuff at you, and now we get overwhelmed. And so I think at the end of the day, all of that stuff is up for a reevaluation. And even if you represent a brand, you're reevaluating it as well. And then you need to think about what purposes. But I think a lot of it's got to do with personal-led first, and then your brand. Because previously, you're like, oh, my brand needs to be there. Really? Well, what about you as a person? Do you really need to be there? Then does your brand really need to be there? So these are questions that I think we're asking more on a philosophical purpose. I think there's examples of where brands have done a pretty good job of that. There are two things. You either wait for the storm to pass, if you've done something you thought was great and people said, no, that was rubbish. Like Pepsi. I think they probably need to jump on that quick. Obviously. However, United have now taken over, so somebody else is not doing so well. But the truth is, well, in the Pepsi example, it was a very strong intent that was positive. Their intent to say, hey, the world is changing and transforming around us, and we want to join a conversation of truth, is great. Just the way they did it was so backwards to the culture that they're now having to react. Embracing conversation is very, very important. But doing it on platforms where conversations happen is most important, because otherwise you're going to be sitting there thinking, well, I'm not in control of my brand. It's okay as an individual if you don't respond to anything, but as a brand, I think it's a totally different responsibility. I think you have to respond, because at the end of the day, you want people to actually converse with you. So conversations could be as simple as proposing a question and then addressing the answers as you go. And I think that's a positive thing for a brand to do. What I can't stand if a brand poses a question and people don't answer that question and they want to talk about another topic, and brands don't address what that topic is that person wants to address. I think that's blindness. So instead of a brand reflecting what they believe their brand should be, they should be reflecting what people actually care about their brand to be. So an idea should be a reflection of what people who consume it, not the person who owns the brand. Because I think the brands have been democratized. I don't think you own your brand anymore. I think people who consume it do. The challenge today is we're in a feeds-based skimming culture of information. The political changes across the planet and the political landscape has forced us to become deeper. So I do think in media, slow journalism, I don't think it ever went away, but I think it's come back in different forms. Where today you might submit a piece that's 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 words. I don't think it's about words anymore. I think it's about sight, sound, and motion. It's about doing things that are very, very different, that enables a story to have far more depth in the way that you want to communicate. So media needs to adjust to the different types of media to create what the message is, and not rely on what they've done in the past. In this skimming culture, the people who are going to change that behaviour, ultimately I think are going to be the younger kids, and they're the ones who are going to sort of determine how they consume culture as well, because we're all acting like kids anyway, but I want to see what kids do with the access of this technology. We've lost our way in some respects. So if we can get back to why, a lot of that's got to do with story, and then you connect with it emotionally as opposed to rationally, because rationally I think is about oversaturating and hoping that people would ultimately buy. And that's why you end up with wonky reports. 0.01% of the banner ad worked. What? What happened to the 99.99% of it that didn't? Where did that go? Is it an ethereal thing? Is it the fact that we think they saw it, so it's subliminal, but we can only absolutely measure the click? So I think that is up for evaluation, and that's where I'm saying it's less about the telling. I don't need to be told. You know, give me some nuance, give me something interesting, some sort of expression, and that's where I think story takes over.